This young and handsome fella just bought himself a new Xperia phone and he's about to unleash his creativity into the world and become the new Peter McKinnon of mobile phones.
But there's a problem. Where the hell do you start? Hey, what's up everyone? So, a few months ago I made a guide about how to use the Photo Pro app for Xperia phones, but as much as you guys enjoyed it, I didn't. And what I mean by that is because it was my very first video for the channel, and back then I didn't have this setup. I didn't even have a microphone, and it was just not what I really wanted to look like or sound like. Fast forward 6 months and the Photo Pro app itself was updated a couple of times, I think. And I'm sure in the meantime, a lot of you guys bought an Xperia phone. So I thought I'd make a 2024 updated version of it with my best tips that I'll share with you from using the app for the last 6 months. So grab your phone or pen and a paper and start taking notes. Right, so we're now in the Photo Pro app. And if you haven't changed any of the settings, the first thing you'll be greeted with is the basic mode. So as you can see on the screen, the basic mode is your box standard automatic shooting mode. Straight off the bat, I'll just say it, and I keep saying it all the time. The basic automatic mode is pretty good at just taking, that basic shot. So, your day-to-day kind of shots, pictures of the dog, pictures of documents, pictures of the food, that you're going to take and show your friends and family. But I wouldn't really shoot anything worth shooting in basic mode. And the reason for that is very simple. The first one is, unlike some other phones, the JPEGs that it will come out with are very, very small. We're talking about 2-3 megs at most. And it just really shows on the output that the result is very kind of mushy. And it's not really good. Again, it's compressed to death. Also, the other thing with the basic mode is that it will over sharpen and HDRify your footage, your photos, and it's probably, it might not be the look that you want to go for. So as you can see on the screen at the moment at the top, it's got HDR there. So it will do what, most iPhones and Samsung phones of the world do. Boost up the shadows and boost up the highlights, and you will end up with that HDR look. So if we start from the left, I'm going to start with a few tips straight off the bat. So if you go to the menu on the left hand side, and what you want to do first is go to drive mode and make sure that you're in single shooting. So we'll go through all the options later, but for now, just make sure that you're in single shooting. Again, if you haven't changed anything, it should be on single shooting, okay? Then the second one that you want to sort out is the focus mode. By default, you'll be on continuous autofocus, but what you want to do is be in single autofocus. And the reason for that is, I'll just show you. If we go back to the camera app, if I want to shoot, let's say, the camera at the back there, okay, I'm gonna half press my shutter button on it, and if I recompose my shot, it's gonna want to again focus on the Khaleesi here. So I don't want that to happen. If I want to lock my autofocus on something, I don't want it to be changing constantly. And that might be good for shooting moving subjects. But 9 times out of 10, unless you're particular about what the shots you're taking, 9 times out of 10, you want your subject to be locked and recompose your picture and take the shot. So we go back to the menu and we go back to focus mode, and we'll stick it to single shot autofocus. And now I'll show you again. Now, if I lock my focus on the camera, even if I put it right in front of the figure in there, you'll see that the focus is still locked on the camera. So I can literally recompose my shot and take the shot whenever I want, and the camera is still in focus as long as I've got my finger pressed on the half pressed shutter button. Second tip, if you jump to haptic feedback, so we go down there and we'll find it somewhere. Haptic feedback, make sure you turn that off. That could potentially create tiny little movement, and if you're shooting in low light, which we'll go about later, you might introduce a little bit of kind of movement in your photos. So haptic feedback, just leave it off for now. Another tip as well, guys, is to turn grid lines on. By default, a bit off, And here we go, I'll just show you. But it's really handy to have it on because at least you can compose your picture the way you want and have your subject on the grid. So again, I'm going to scroll back to grid lines and turn that on. And at least it helps you with leveling your picture as well. So you know if your picture is straight or not. Later on, when we go to the manual mode, you'll see you've got a tool that allows you to see how straight your picture is, but in basic manual mode, you don't have access to this tool. Right, so that's it for the first few tips for you guys. So now if we move on to the lenses here, you see that some of them are surrounded by them little bubbles there, and others are not. So simply what that means is that the ones that are circled are your native lenses. So when you shoot, you won't introduce any extra processing, if that makes sense. So if I jump to ×2 here, what the camera will do, it will actually blow up the image that it's getting from the 1x sensor and blow it up to a 2x. But you will introduce processing and it will degrade the quality of your shot. So always try to stick to the main lenses. All the in-betweens are just a zoomed in version of the previous lens. Okay, so a ×10 is a zoomed in version, digitally zoomed in version of the 5.2 lens and so on. So always try to stick to those. Again, in basic mode, it really doesn't matter because you're probably not going to be after that quality shot. It's just more of like a quality of life improvement. Again, in manual mode, you'll find out that you do not get the in-betweens. So you can only shoot with those native lenses. Right, so moving on to the right-hand side, the little bar there that we got here. So that's your aspect ratio. So if you want to make full use of your sensor, always go in 4:3. And if you can see, actually it tells you 4:3, 12 megapixel, and that is the actual sensor. Now, if you jump into the others, you can see 16:9, you'll see 9 megapixels, so that goes down, and so on. So always try to stick to 4:3, and then if needs be, you can crop in post afterwards. Second one is the flash, so it's self-explanatory whether you want to use anti-red eye, automatic synced flash, or just use it as a fill light. And next we got the night mode. Just leave that one to auto, especially if you're shooting in basic mode. You want it to kick in when the phone thinks the light is not enough, and it will kick in. Then you got your filters. I'm not one to use any filters, to be honest, but if you want to give a certain look to your photos, then you can do so in this menu. But to be honest, if you're gonna be serious about your photography, just leave that to standard, and then when you jump into manual mode, you can shoot your photos in RAW format and then add any style that you want to your photos in post, like in Photoshop or Lightroom. Then moving on, we've got a drive mode. So that is basically how many shots it will take when you fully press the shutter button. So in single shooting, you're literally aiming, and then when you press your shutter button, it will take one picture. If you change that to low or high plus, it will take a series of consecutive shots and it will fill the memory until you let go of the half press button. And that is really good if you want to capture a moving subject, like, I don't know, like a car, like a bus, a bicycle, children, dogs. And it helps you just making sure that you got the right focus at the right time. Then the third one up there is the same again, but with HDR in mind. The other ones will just shoot in standard mode. Then further down, we've got our bokeh mode. And this one is self-explanatory, really. It's your standard bokeh mode. And if you change the slider up or down, you can see the background's getting more and more blurred. One thing to be said is that you can see on the preview, it's not perfect at all. But once you've taken the shot, then the chipset inside the phone will work out exactly what should be in focus and what's not. And 9 times out of 10, it should give you good results. So once you've chosen that, you can click on your subject, and then you've got the choice of choosing the lens that you want to use. One thing to note here is the optical image stabilization doesn't kick in very well, so it's very shaky. But in general, to be fair, the Xperia phones don't really have an amazing OIS to start with, okay? But yeah, that's your bokeh mode. So we're just going to take a quick photo. I'll show you now. So now if I focus, here we go, on the Khaleesi, well, we'll probably do for the 1x And there you go. And now if we look at the photo, you'll see it's much better than what it actually looked like in the preview. It's actually pretty spot on, to be honest. Really good. And then the last one is your light settings. So it's just very basic here. It's just to choose whether you want a colder look. So you can see now, if you look at the walls, it's a colder look. And if we go up, it just changed the warmth. So it's basically the temperature of your photo. As a general rule, I just leave it set as normal and then reset it and then let the camera sort it out for you. And then the one on the right hand side here is just the exposure, whether you want it darker or brighter. Again, just leave the camera sort out its bits, and 9 times out of 10 it should do it properly. So that was the basic mode, and again is just that, a basic auto manual mode, which the camera, the phone itself, will work out all the settings for you, and all you have to worry about is just point and shoot. So now let's kick things up a notch, and we're gonna jump to our wheel on the left hand side and jump to automatic. So now you're probably thinking, well, hang on, I was in basic mode, automatic, it's the same. Well, what auto mode is basically the manual mode, but in automatic, and it all makes sense in a second. So if we click on that, now you can see the interface has changed quite drastically. So on this side there, you can see you've got rows of different buttons and very confusing icons, you probably think, and we're going to go through them and explain what they do. But first, again, now, if you actually go to the menu button, you'll see the whole menu's changed completely, and you get a whole different range of options. And you've got your shooting mode, you've got your exposure and your color, you've got your focus and your setup. Now, if you're not confident just yet using the full manual mode, and you should be after watching this video, you can stick in automatic and that will still produce better results than if you were in basic mode. So the first thing that I want to stress, guys, is that when you go to your options here under shooting, you've got the first option is file format. When you click on that, you've got the option to choose between JPEG, RAW and JPEG, and RAW. What RAW allows is to maintain as much information from the sensor in your picture that you can then edit afterwards. JPEG is more like a ready meal, okay? You take your picture, it's done. You can eat it, it's done. It's already baked in, or everything's been done in the factory for you. It's ready to be consumed, all right? That's the best analogy I can give you. RAW is more like the raw product, the raw material, the raw information from the sensor that you have to edit afterwards in post. So a raw photo, 9 times out of 10, probably looks a bit worse than a JPEG, and that's absolutely fine, because it's the raw state of the picture that you have to alter after yourself, like the colors, like the brightness, and give it a style if you like. But what you can do is press RAW and JPEG if you want to, or if you know 100% that you'll be editing your photo afterwards, then leave it in RAW. But for the purpose of the exercise, I'm just going to leave it in RAW and JPEG for now. So if we go back now, again, you've got some of the options that we saw earlier, but they're all laid out on this menu here. So you've got the aspect ratio, you've got, again, the driver mode that we talked about earlier, and camera settings, memory. We get to that later. It's a very important menu, but again, yeah, we'll get to that later. Digital zoom settings, I'll save you a job, just don't use it, guys. Then if we scroll down to exposure and color, now all these options here on the right hand side, you can pretty much find on the main menu, so we're not gonna mess about with that. Then the next one down the line is autofocus, manual focus menu. So again, some of the options that we saw earlier are in here. So focus mode, single shot, that's what we picked earlier. Focus area, we've got focus area color, we've got face and eye autofocus, peaking color. So again, all of these are actually in the main menu, so I'll show you that in a second. So the last menu is the setup menu. So this one, again, we've touched on the grid lines earlier. The top one is basically what happens when you touch to focus. So when you tap your screen, whether it's gonna track the current subject, or if it's just gonna autofocus on there, or if it's gonna adjust the focus and the brightness. For now, I'll just leave it on object tracking. Then underneath there, you've got a button that's called AEL button customization. So when we go in there, it's basically a shortcut. So you can put anything you want in there. Normally what I do is I leave peaking on, and I'll explain what that is for later. It's just a way to get a more visual input on what's in focus in your photo. So I recommend using that, but if you're not going to do any manual focusing, then you can probably use any of the other settings here, any of the shortcuts that you want. And then going down from there, you've got the function menu customization, and that allows you to change all these icons on the right hand side to put the ones that you want that make the most importance to you in that little menu on the right hand side. But to me, I just leave it as it is because all the options that I need are in there already. Then next one down is the display button customization. So this one, we'll get to that in a second, is just a little shortcut that allows you to put the level on the screen as well as your histogram. And that is very important if you're going to shoot in manual. So I recommend just leave it as it is. And then I'll let you explore the rest of the settings for yourself if you'd like to. It's just regular settings for, if you wanted to change the location of your files, if you want geotagging on there, if you want to add the Bluetooth remote, extra tutorials, accessibility, and reset your settings. But that's pretty much for that menu. So if we go back to the main menu, now, like I said, on the left-hand side here, we've got the display button. So when I click on it, now you can see in the middle, we've got our levels, and that is really, really handy to know if your shot is going to be leveled or not. And also when you click on that button, you can see now just down here, you got the histogram, and that is extremely important to know how you expose your photos. But we'll get back to that in a minute when we go to full manual mode, because that is your best friend to know if your shadow is going to be crushed or if your highlights are going to be blown out. So now, as you can see, now we've got the peaking button on that side, and when I click on it, you can see it's kind of getting fuzzy, and that means that it shows you all the fuzzy bits here show you what's in focus. So as you can see in the background at the moment, there's no fizziness at all. It's only on the main subject here, and that's because she's in focus. If we were to move, there we go, the focus to the fan and the speaker, now you can see they got little fuzzy bits on them, and that's because they're the center of the focus. And again, if we go back to the main character here, that one is in focus. And that is really handy if you were to do some manual focusing. If you're not, then you can just turn it off and get out of the way. But at least it's really handy to have it there, have a click of a button rather than having to go to the menu just to change that setting. So again, here on the right hand side, we got our different drive modes. You got focus mode, so single shot or continuous autofocus, which we changed earlier. This one here, I would highly recommend, and that's probably tip number 2 here for you guys, to change the focus area from wide to center. And the reason for that is, I'll show you straight away. When you focus on something, the camera will try its best to think what you want to focus on. Right now, I want to focus on the fan. Right, there we go, it's doing it. But let's say now I want to focus on the dragon on the Khaleesi here. Well, it's focusing on her feet. All right, so that is because it's the camera trying to work out where the focus should be. But now if we click on center, every time I half press my shutter button, it will actually, if you can see now, it will focus on that specific spot right in the middle where that little green square is. And that is the best setting that you guys can change, because now literally at a click of a finger, what you can do is focus your picture, recompose, take the shot. Done straight away without having to mess. If we were to leave that on wide again, there you go. Now see, we got a problem where I'm trying to focus on the camera at the back, but it's trying to focus on her face, and it's very, very annoying, as you can see. So now if I go back to center, focus on the camera, recompose, take the shot. Right, now moving on to the right hand side, as you can see, all the icons there are grayed out on the right. Your ISO, your metering, your white balance, and your filters, and that's because you're in auto mode. Okay, so again, to make your life a lot easier, the camera will try to compensate for all the settings like the brightness of the shot, the ISO, and the shutter speed for you. And all you have to do is concentrate on your subject. So now the only other thing that you've got input in is the lenses. So your 16mm, your 24mm, your 85mm, all the way to your 125mm. There you go, through that. But that's pretty much it for the auto mode. Again, it was just a step above the basic mode where the results will be much better than what you can get in regular basic mode because it'll be less processed, and you also get the option to have your file saved as a raw file, which you can later on edit in Lightroom or Photoshop or any other editing software. So that was for the auto mode, but yet again, let's kick it up another notch. So now if we scroll to the P mode or program auto, this will give you a few more options to play with. So at the top here, you can see now you got an EV slider from -2 to +2, and that's your exposure compensation. So you can make your shot brighter or darker, and the camera, you don't have to worry about anything else. The camera will sort out the settings for you, your shutter speed and your ISO. Actually, if you look down there, the ISO, which I'll explain in a second, it will vary as you change the exposure. So it's just an easy way to kind of sort out the light in your scene without having to worry too much about the shutter speed down here or your ISO down here. So again, like I said, it's a notch up from the auto mode, where all you have to worry about is now your subject and your light as well. So if you make the subject brighter, there we go, I can shake the shot and it's done. But now on top of that, you also get a few more settings on the right hand side here. So your ISO here is normally set to automatic. So if you were in P mode, I wouldn't worry about changing any of those settings because that's the purpose of being in a P mode. If you wanted to change any of those settings, then you'd go into full manual mode, but we'll get that to in a second. So again, now you've got a few new settings that have appeared on the right side, so we're going to go through those. So the ISO is basically, in a nutshell, the sensitivity of the sensor, so the amount of light that hits the sensor and how in turn is going to turn into a bright or a darker image. So the number one thing that you have to remember is the higher ISO that you use, the more noisy and the more degraded your photo will be. You have to remember that on mobile phones we're using tiny little sensors. So the higher you use the ISO, the more noise, more grain, be extremely visible on the end photo. So make sure to keep your ISO, no matter what setting you're in, between 100 and 400. If you go past 400, that's where you're really going to start degrading your shot. So even if you're in very low light, make sure you are stable, and we'll get to that in a second when we get to full manual mode, but make sure you're on a tripod and stick to a lower ISO. And that's what normally I don't recommend using auto mode, like, you know, the P mode or the auto mode, because it will use very high ISO numbers to take the photo, and once you get to your final shot, you may be a bit disappointed because it will look very grainy and very noisy. Then next one along is the metering mode. So by default, you've got the multi, and what these three settings do, the multi, center and spot, is how they evaluate, how they work out the light in your scene. So in multi, it will take the average amount of light in the whole scene and give you what you see right now. Now, if you were to go to center, it will kind of weigh this area in a bit more. So this area here, the middle square, and we'll see what's in it. So if we go over this dark area here, you'll see that now the whole area of the photo is going to be way brighter, because we're telling the camera to kind of focus, not in terms of focus, but in terms of light, to this area only. But now if we go to the spot, it will be right in this, between this little square here. So that'll be literally a dot. So if we go to this character here, it will calculate the average amount of light from this point right in the middle here. Same if I go on the speaker now, you see the whole area got brighter because I was pointing right at that spot just here. Same if I go to this spot here, and if I go to the wall now. So from experience, it's best to stay in multi for 99% of shots that you'll be taking. No matter whether you're shooting in automatic or in full manual mode, I highly recommend you leave it in multi. There's only very specific scenarios where you'd want to use any of the other two. oops, what did I do here? So leave it in multi. Then underneath, you've got the flash mode, you've got your filter mode. So moving along on the right hand side there, we've got the automatic white balance. So now 99% of the time I'd say leave it on auto. And reason for that is because remember we're shooting in RAW format, and the RAW format allows you to change the white balance afterwards in post. So there's only very little situations or scenarios where you'd want to change those. But I mean, if you wanted to, you can. You've got your daylight, your cloudy, incandescent, and you can also set some custom white balance, but that is really specific to certain scenarios. 9 times out of 10, you'll be staying in automatic white balance. And then this little guy down there has made a little appearance, DR off. So what that is the dynamic range. Personally, I'd leave it on DRO automatic, so that's D-range optimizer, and that is basically what allows you to increase slightly, and we're talking about, again, little sensors here, to increase slightly the dynamic range, so the difference between the highlights and the shadows in your shot. So if you leave it to off, then there's literally no processing being done on that level, and you'd have a harder time getting the right exposure. So I'd say leave your setting to automatic on DRO. So now let's switch from P mode to S mode, which is shutter speed priority. So now instead of being in charge of your exposure compensation at the top, you're in charge of your shutter speed. So now you have to understand that shutter speed stands for the amount of light that gets into the sensor for how long the shutter stays open. So at the moment I've got it at, let's say, 1,000th of a second. That's how long it takes for the shutter to open and shut for the light to go in. So at the moment there's not a lot of light that goes in because the shutter literally opens and closes pretty much instantly, and the higher you go, the darker your picture gets. But on the opposite scale of it, if you leave it open for longer, so let's say, I don't know, let's leave it open for a whole second. So that means for 1 second, the shutter will be open and a lot of light will hit the sensor. But what in turn that also means is that if you were to move the camera, you'll introduce a lot of blur, a lot of blur because the shutter is still open and you're taking the picture, and that will kind of look bad. So that's why you have to leave your shutter speed, if you're going to shoot handheld, nowhere above, well, or below 1/30th of a second. That's where you can kind of be stable by shooting at 1/30th of a second. If you go any lower by shooting handheld, you will introduce blur in your picture, unless you use a tripod, and then in that case, you can leave it open for as long as you want. So as you can see now, as I move the shutter speed, the ISO is moving up and down, and that's because, again, instead of the exposure compensation, all you're in charge of is the shutter speed. Everything else is worked out by the camera. So generally you'd want to be using the S mode for moving subjects, like a bus, like a train, like a car, like a moving subject, like a toddler, a dog, any animal, when trying to keep up with their movement. And for that, let's say, I don't know, for a bus or a car, you try to be between 640th of a second, 800th of a second, and you don't have to worry about your ISO. You can be really literally quick, go into S mode, focus, and boom, you got your shot, and it'll be in focus and sharp. But do remember that obviously by cranking up your shutter speed or lowering it, the phone is working out the ISO. So always remember that in shutter speed, all you do is your shutter speed, and then the camera might crank up the ISO very high, which will leave you with a noisy and kind of grainy look. So just bear that in mind. And now that leaves us with the full manual mode. So I know it might sound a bit daunting, but that is literally 99% of the time the mode that I'm in to shoot all my photos on the channel. And that's because I'm in charge of the shutter speed and the ISO. And like I said earlier, one thing that you want to do is really, especially on the phone, really especially on the phone with the tiny sensors, you want the ISO to be as low as possible. Earlier we couldn't do that, but now in full manual mode we can. So we switch from auto to 100. So normally in in broad daylight, I'd say 100 is more than enough for 90% of the shots. But currently we are indoors, so we can bump it up to 200. Now, remember what I said earlier, it's okay to use it to about 400, maybe 500, but anything above that, you will have very, very grainy and noisy photos. So just bear that in mind. So at the moment, I've just put it on 200, but as you can see, it's still a bit dark. So what we can do now to counteract that is to mess with the shutter speed. And again, if you remember earlier, I said, you can go all the way down to maybe a 30th of a second or 20th of a second until your photo starts getting all blurries. Your photos start getting blurry if you were to move. So at the moment, 1/30th of a second is actually pretty all right. Now, to know if your photo, especially if you're shooting outdoors and you can't really see the screen properly, this is your best friend, the histogram. And now, all the bars on this side, on the left, are your shadows. All the bars on the right hand side here are your highlights. So if you get bars all the way to the right, that means that you're crushing your highlights. And if you get all the bars on the left, they're all crushed in that corner there, that means that, yeah, your shadows are crushed and you will lose all that detail and you won't be able to recover it in post in Lightroom, okay? So what you want to do ideally is to have a nice little curve in the middle there. So by going to 1/30th of a second or 1/20th of a second, there you go, 1/25th, we can see the bulk of it is in the middle. What you have got on the left here is probably this area, the dark area, but it's not all crushed. So we can get that back in post later. So it's not too bad, okay? So as you can see, the bulk of our exposure here is in the center, is in the middle, which is what you want to achieve in every single shot that you take. Well, most of the shot depends on the creative style of photo that you go for. But generally speaking, for a balanced image, you want this area in the middle to be like a little mountain in the middle and nothing too much on the left and nothing too much on the right. Okay, otherwise you lose the detail. So again, this is your best friend. So really, the full manual mode is not that daunting. If you think about what you do prior to take your shot is set your ISO to a value and then you don't touch it. So if you're outdoors in broad daylight, you set it to 100. If you're indoors and it's the middle of the day, you set it to about 200. If it's kind of like nighttime indoors, but you still got a bit of lighting, you crank it up to maybe 200-300. And then if you're outdoors and it's nighttime, you got low lighting, then you want to play with your ISO around about 400-500, and then your shutter speed to about, yeah, this sort of 30th of a second, 20th of a second. And if you have a tripod, use it and then you can go even lower. But yeah, so when I'm out and about taking photos, really what I mess about once I've set my ISO is just a shutter speed. That's all I do, guys. So there's a lot of people going, oh, do you know what, the full manual mode is way too hard to understand. But obviously if you watch this guide, you'll know that it isn't. It's just a matter of setting your ISO first, and then your shutter speed is what you literally play with 99% of the time just to get the right exposure. Having said that, full manual mode on the phone is kind of a bit easier than if it was on the camera, because on the camera you'd have a third variable to look after, and it's this one, the aperture. Luckily, or well, unluckily, but you know, luckily for you, it makes it easier because it's fixed on these phones, on the Xperia phones. Your aperture is fixed, so you don't have to mess about with that. Or again, all you have to worry about is your shutter speed and your ISO. Once again, once your ISO is locked on the right hand side to a value, then all you have to worry about is your shutter speed and getting your right composition, which should be pretty quick since we've already set it up to do single shot with the focusing set to single shot autofocus. And really there's not much else to it. It's just, you know, once you understand what all these icons do, then really it's about enjoying taking a photo and playing with the shutter speed to take your photo. Now, even though I said I use this mode 99% of the time, there are still cases where I'm going to be using the next one down. So that's the last mode, and that is the custom mode or memory recall. So you're now greeted to your screen, and when you look at it, there's not much you can do to it. There's literally actually nothing you can do to it apart from on the right hand side, you got cancel and apply. And that is basically a mode where you can actually save any settings that you want, any any settings, any ISO, any shutter speed, any white balance, anything, and save it as a preset. And that is absolutely genius. That really can save your life depending on the type of shot that you're after. So bear with me now. I'm just going to go through a few settings. So let's say we want to do a photo shoot, a portrait shooting of a subject. So let's say I want this to be on 85mm lens, okay, because I want a portrait. Hang on, let me go back a bit. So I want, let's say, some warmer tones. So I'm going to go to, we're going to go to cloudy. So it's going to be a bit warmer tones. And then I want ISO maybe to 100 because I don't want a lot of noise. But I want the shutter speed to be on a tripod. Let's say we're doing a portrait on a tripod. So I'm going to stick it to 1/5 of a second, okay? There we go. No, it doesn't want to focus because I'm too close to it. There we go. So let's say that's the type of look that I want to go for, and I'm going to be using this day in, day out. But obviously in between those shots, I'll be doing other things. So I don't want to have to mess with having to do all the settings every single time. Actually, we're going to go one step further, and we're going to change the manual focusing, because we didn't touch that subject, to manual focus, okay? So now, if I go to manual focus, I've got a little button on the right hand side there, which says focus magnifying tool. So now I can actually do the focus manually here. And if we remember earlier, we've done the peaking, so that actually can help us. So if I do that now, we can see the peaking. So there we go, we're totally in focus now. So we can take the peaking off. So that's what I want. I want my phone to be on a tripod, and I'm going to take portrait shots of this model here. And that's the settings I want. So now what I do, I'll jump to the menu. I go to camera settings memory down here. And now we got 1, 2, 3 at the top. So let's say that's going to be my setting number 1. So I don't need to touch anything else here, because again, we can't touch anything. It's just a collection of all the settings that you have currently. And I'm going to save it to number 3 because my number 1 is already done. So I'm going to save it to number 3. So save combination of modes and settings, save. Camera settings saved. You can easily recall these settings using the manual recall shooting mode. So now let's set a different preset. So let's say I want to do some burst mode of cars or buses going past, and I want to take a series of photos to make sure that I've got the right focus and they're all nice and sharp and crisp. So what I can do is now revert my settings back. So I want the auto balance, the white balance to be on automatic. The focus, I definitely want that to be in continuous autofocus. And let's say we're going to be doing some night shoot. So we're going to put it to the ISO to 400. And there we are. So now what I want to do is drive mode. I want drive mode to be continuous. See? So if we want to do burst mode, so a large amount of photos taken at the same time, I need to change this setting, because at the moment I'm set for RAW and JPEG, but that's why they grayed out these settings on the right, the continuous one. You need to be in JPEG. So I'm going to go to menu, I'm going to go to file format and JPEG. And now if we go back and I go to my drive mode again, now we can select any of those. So because I want to be taking photos of very fast subjects, I'm going to go to continuous high. And now if we look, my drive mode is set to high, my autofocus is on continuous, my focus area is absolutely fine, it's in the center, and my white balance is set as well, and my main lens, my 24mm, is set as well. So what I'll do again, I'll go back to menu, I'll go back to create camera settings memory, and we're going to choose number 2, and I'm going to save it. And again, that's going to save all my settings. So let's say now I'm in regular, automatic mode. and I'm taking regular pictures, and all of a sudden I want to take a picture of a fast subject. I go to memory recall, pick my setting number 2, bam, I'm ready to take hundreds of pictures of buses, cars, bicycles, anything that moves fast in the frame. And as you can see, I've got hundreds of pictures now taken because I'm in burst mode in JPEG. And then I decide I want to go back to a bit of a portrait shooting. So I go back to my memory and I go to my third preset that we've already created, apply it, and as you can see now, I'm ready to take a shot. So obviously I had it set to manual focus. So I can't remember where my manual focus was, but you get the gist of it. So all I can do now is take my photo and I'm back in, as you can see, in RAW and JPEG, and all my different settings here. Hang on, that's really annoying me. All my settings are set as I left them in the save preset. And if I want to get out of this mode, I just literally click there, go back to manual, and it just throws me back to the last previously mode in manual. So the custom preset mode is an invaluable tool that, if mastered properly, will get you out of sticky situations. You can literally jump from shot type to shot type by just using your presets. So it's not very common to find it on the phone, but on the Xperia, it's one of the features that I actually love the most, and I use it so much, it's unreal. When I'm on locations and I want to jump between a regular shot, when I do like some, telephoto shots or something, and all of a sudden a bus catches my eye and I want to take a shot of it, I just quickly jump to my memory recall and jump to my preset, apply, done, and I'm ready to shoot in literally a space of a second, rather than having to set every single setting again for that type of shot. So it's definitely a lifesaver. Yes, I know it's a lot to take in, especially if you've never used a DSLR or a mirrorless camera before, but I hope it all made sense. Once again, I just want to emphasize on the fact that the basic automatic mode on the Xperia phone is just that, a basic quick and dirty shot mode. I wouldn't even call it a point and shoot. The quicker you get used to the other modes, the better your photos will look. If you guys have any questions, make sure to leave them down in the comment section, and if this video helped you out, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already done so, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It really means a lot to me, but it also gives me that extra oomph to go and create more content for you guys. Plus, I've got a ton of stuff still in the pipeline coming very soon, and you definitely want to stick around to find out more. So thank you all for watching, take care, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!